Hello and welcome to this video, guys. Today we're going to look into NX model federation with Angular. We're also going to examine how the builds could potentially work in production. We're also going to look into how we can share data between different applications. So let's get started. So in order for us to get started, we can write npx create NX workspace, and we're going to go with the latest setup. We're also going to say, let's call it Angular monorepo. We can preset it to be an Angular monorepo as well. And it's going to give us a couple of different alternatives. It's going to tell us what do we name it. Let's call it just Angular monorepo, SCSS. Let's go with Cypress. No. Yes, routing. No. So this might take some time. It will generate the monorepo. It will also generate the application. Keep in mind, we're not really going to use the application. We want to utilize model federation. So in order for us to actually do that, we'll have to generate a new host application. This is just a standalone Angular application. So we'll be right back once this is up and running. Alright, now so that we're back, we have installed everything. We should have under the apps folder, we should have the Angular monorepo app and the end-to-end project for that as well. We're not going to use them right now, as I mentioned. So if you have NX console installed, you can just click on it. You can click on generate. You search for host. A host is essentially the same thing as a shell in this case, so you can just generate it. You can name it here. Let's just give it the name host. You can also create remotes, but let's just take a step back because I think there's something wrong with the schematics in NX here. It tries to create the host on the root, which we do not want. So we want it to be grouped under apps/host essentially. So we can just check the dry run here to see where it will be generated in order for us to actually get a good way of working. All right, so this seems to be good enough for us to start working with. We can generate it. It's going to go quite fast since we already have all of the main projects and things installed. For instance, Angular dependencies and so on. So if I reload here, I should have the two new projects, so an end-to-end and the host application that we just generated. So now we should be able to, either if you run it through NX console, you can just try to serve the application to see if you have any issues. There might be some problems. I'm running on the latest version of NX to get the latest features that they have. And I also want this to be up to date to what actually happens when you will run it on a local environment in your computer. So when you try to serve the application, it should be running on port 4200. We should be able to navigate there and see what would happen. We can just throw this up a bit and we'll add a screen shortly next to this one. Alright, so now we're here. We can see that localhost 4200 serves quite fine. Here's the NX entry component, so we can just go ahead and clean this up a bit. I'm not even going to bother to delete it. You'd probably delete it when you work in your own project. Just for convenience sake, there's no need for all of this boilerplate code. So you can essentially just copy everything, remove it. Let's say host entry component. Let's save this to see, and here you should be able to see host entry component. All right, so this is the component that's the entry point of the whole application. So the question is, how do we add new applications into this? So in order for us to add what you would call a remote application, which is essentially one of the Microfrontends, we can open the NX here. We can go to generate, and instead of having host here, we want to write a remote. So we can generate the remote application. We're also going to name, let's say that we're going to name this a cart. So for instance, if you're building a e-commerce platform, maybe we want to have it divided in this way. And here we can specify which we want the remote application to be attached to. We're going to say our host application. Let's see, you can see the dry run here seems to have a strange place where it places the application. So we're going to override it. The directory there, we're going to place it under apps and cart. If you want to have a subfolder to like Microfrontends, you could do that by essentially adding it here. I think it's much easier to do it from the start. Otherwise, you will have to bother changing a lot of configuration files, which is quite cumbersome process. So let's just go ahead and remove this. We have the cart in this way. We'll generate it. It will be connected automatically. Let's see if there's any other options we want to specify here. As for now, like usually I would have SCSS. We can just skip this for now. So now generating this, we should generate a remote application. Keep in mind that even the remote application are per se their own applications. So now we have a cart, maybe you want to have product detail page and so on. We'll group it under the domain of product. So the micro frontend called product. We can generate another micro frontend here. Also keep in mind we are attaching it to the host. I think this is something, or previously something that NX has helped with. So if we now just close a couple of things and we go to the host page and we go to the model federation config.js file. Here you should see the remote application. So we have cart and product applications that we just generated, right? If we go to the config.js file, this just inherits, or it essentially fetches the configuration from that config file. But when we build for production, which I will get into in a later phase in this video, is that we need to specify where the different applications are, because we'll not be able to run on localhost ports that we are having in this case. So that's only for local development. So we're going to look into that as well in a later phase in the video, where we are going to explore the build options and so on. All right, so to continue, now we have the app. If we go to the host source app, so we're going to check on the routes, and this is essentially what NX adds to us. Just all of this boilerplate code comes automatically. It's lazy loading the whole entry module. So the way it actually works is that you expose a certain you would export a certain chunk of the code from the cart on a certain port. So if you go to that project, we go to project JSON, we can see the cart page serves at port 4201. Keep in mind this is only for local host development, right? So what it does is it should have a remote entry module. So the remote entry module here is what we expose on a certain port. So just to look how this is set up, you can go to the model federation config of the remote application to see. So you say, I'm exposing my module, so the entry module TS, you can name it whatever you want. The most interesting part is the name and what it's being named as when you expose it, because these two together is what actually you are setting up in the host application. So if you go to the app routes in the host application, you would see that this is cart/module and this is cart module. All right, so this is combined in this way. So you can also have multiple, right? You could have a couple of different chunks of the cart feature that you expose to other applications at the same time. So you don't have to expose the whole entire application at the same time. You can decide to only expose a chunk of that, and you can import that chunk to a certain host application. All right. So once we get that out of the way, there's a couple of other things we want to do. So now we're actually only serving the host application. We want to be able to serve the other applications. So I will just go back here, NX console. I'm quite lazy, so I will always do this. Just reload the page or reload the project section, and you should see that the project should appear here if everything has gone the way we want it. But as we can see, it's not. So what we want to do is we want to stop this project real fast. We reload the host. Let's see what happens. Nothing happens, so let's just go ahead and copy this real quick. I think there's also even further schematics which we can use. As you can see, when we reserve it now, just to keep this in our mind, is that when we reserve the host application, it automatically serves or essentially builds the remote applications. The reason to why it does this is because when we decide to serve our host application, and it actually generates some output for the other remote application so that we can work on this. So this means that if we're serving the host and we want to make a change to the cart, we need to re-serve the application because it works in this way. And we can just shrink the screen a bit, and as you can see here on port 4200, the host application is served. If you scroll up a bit, you'll be able to see that on 4202 we are serving let's see, it was the product. So if we navigate to 4202, we can do that by just holding the control and clicking on this. Let's minimize the screen a bit so that we can preview it. And also here you can see we have welcome to the product. If we go to 4201, cart is serving there. If you go to the root, we should have the root serving there. So you should be able to just jumping between the different features, and keep in mind that we whatever we have or whatever we navigate to here is essentially the remote application. So when I press on cart, it goes to the remote application, it fetches that data, and that's what's being presented. So let's say I want to go to the cart component, so that would be, let's say, cart module, and we can just see on path empty. It's going to load the entry module. If we go to the routes of that, we can see that it loads the remote entry component, which essentially is the Angular NX welcome component. So we can just go ahead and once again remove this from the child or from the remote application, my cart remote app. If I would save this, it's not going to reflect as mentioned because we are not it's not being served at runtime. You can do and set that up if you want to, but as of this, it's not really supported. I think you can go to serve, you can click on host, and then you can maybe dev remotes, and here you could also specify cart. I only want to serve, for instance, cart and product. And here you can also say we want to have it in rebuild on watch. So if we set this up, we can just copy the schematics. I usually think it's quite nice to have it in the package JSON. So you'd have a script here, essentially, let's call it dev, and then you can spin this up for dev environment. I think when you add the watch flag with true, I'm hoping that it will rebuild the cart and product every time we make a change there. I'm not convinced that it will do, but we can try this out, right? So if I reload the page, I go home, we change the cart to my cart remote app. If I click on product, it still has the ugly it's quite nice, but the NX welcome component. So if I would go to the cart now, here is the NX updated. If I save this, we can see if it actually will rebuild, and as you can see here, running with the watch flag will actually in fact rebuild it, so you don't have to reload it at all times or rebuild and so on. So running with the watch flag will simplify our lives significantly, as we can change in our remote applications at the same time as we change in our home application, meaning we don't have to waste time waiting for the product to actually run. So this is one way of setting up the model federation with NX and Angular. And as I promised, we're going to look into how we can share data between the different applications, so the remotes and the host application. You most likely want to have a login section. Once you have logged in, you're going to store some user credentials, which you should have and be able to work with from each and one of these applications. Maybe you have logged in once and you want to be able to navigate through the different applications with the same token. So let's look at that. So one question I usually get is, how can I share data or share components between this application? It's quite easy. You would have to go to generate a library. So just for heaven's sake, we're just going to look into two different things. First, as I mentioned, we're going to look into the actual way of sharing tokens, so a shared library where we can have services and so on that's being shared. And the second would be the component library that we're going to generate now. So we'll just name the library UI. If you want to have it buildable, you could have it. If you have, maybe you want to share a component library with somewhere else, maybe there's other application that does not live within the monorepo, you could do that, but we're not going to do it for now. As mentioned, we have a broken schematics here, so we need to specify our directory ourselves, and with the dry run it helps us to find out. So we want to place it within libs shared UI. That's where our shared UI needs to live, right? So let's see here, it doesn't need to be buildable or anything right now. We're just going to generate it out of the box. We're going to generate one component for that. So if you just go to the libs, so apps, and then we have our libs folder, we should have a shared UI lib. So within this lib folder, we can copy the relative path just in case if NX is not really doing what we want to do. So we can generate a component. Let's call it a button component, which we want to be shared. Name of the project, there's no name of the project. Let's see if this works to generate, because it seems like it does not really want to do it. Let's see if we can specify. There's no way of actually specifying a library, which is quite trash. Don't really know what has happened to the schematics. It's quite strange, to be honest. So we are going to, let's see if we can use some other. Let's go with schematics Angular to see if this works. Do we really need to specify the project? This seems to be quite odd, to be honest, because we want to be able to create components within the actual libraries, and as the libraries are not showing up, there are a couple of things we could do actually. Let's run nx reset to see what happens. So it will stop the daemons and stuff that we're running. Let's see now if we just reload here, will it actually understand the changes that we have gotten? No, it does not, which is quite annoying. Usually it should show us the libraries that we have. So if we go test, it does not really do it. So what you can do, because it seems to be broken for some reason, you usually can just write nx repair. And if there would be something wrong with the config files, this usually can help us fixing that. But as mentioned, it seems to be some strange with the schematics. Let's see if we can continue now. Now, as you can see, it finds a couple of different things. So running the nx repair will probably repair the broken files that was generated and so on. So now we can select UI. I want this to be our button component. It can be standalone. Who cares? Just generate it as for now. We don't really care right now. Let's see. So it has been generated. If we go back to this, let's make this screen a bit bigger as for now. We go to the button component. Let's just add one input, just make it super simple. Go ahead and say label. You can also go ahead and just give it an empty like this if you don't want it to be required. Like this, and then we'll have a button. Does not really need to look good. This is just for demonstrating purposes. So just have the label here. We can now start using this library. Also keep in mind it needs to be exported as we have done. And just to outline it for you guys, there's different ways of how you can structure the libraries. I usually create one library for each component, and the reason to why we do that is because if one project or one remote is only using one component and we change a different component, we do not want to rebuild that cart project because it didn't really have an affected change, right? However, if you change a button within a shared library, we would not be able to know whether this cart was affected because we are essentially having connections between the actual library and the project and not per component base. Alright, so now that we have that out of box, we are now going to jump into the index file. You always need to export, or not always, but do it. You can export the button component in this way. Let's see here, and now we can essentially just go to the host, let's say app module on the host application to just import this button. I think we named it UI shared module. Let's see here if we have some. It was just UI module. Let's go ahead and see if we have some IntelliSense, and as you can see we have a nice and neat alias here for the import, which is by the way set up on the tsconfig base file. So if you wanted to change this, I could go ahead and just change it to UI, but let's not do it. You can decide on how to structure this your own. Alright, so now we import the UI module. I should be able to use the button component within. So let's just snatch the selector from the button. We copy this, we go to the nx welcome of, let's say, host entry. We could, if we don't want to place it here, we could place it in the root so that it becomes available for all. So host button, we can just add the label hello host, and then we should have a button with hello host. We can remove that. And just to demonstrate, if you want to add this one to the cart page, we could do that as simple as that. So cart module, see, cart app module. So here in the cart app module, we need to import the, sorry, I think it needs to be imported within the remote because that's where we are essentially exposed. So UI module, we import it from there. Let's see if I copy the button. We can just go and copy this real quick from the host. So we can place it here within the remote. So let's see here. Hello cart. So when I save this, let's see here, there's something wrong, is not unknown. This means most likely it has not been imported in a correct way. Let's see where the NX, let's see, maybe saving will solve that for us. So yeah, saving was the issue. Now that we have saved the entry module, once again we can go back here and just add a heading, say cart, just so that we can see where it comes from. Keep in mind that it rebuilds every time we save in the. So now we have a button, hello cart and hello host. So the host is living within the host section and the cart is living within the cart section. So if I now would just minimize it so that we could see it, we should have a hello host, which comes from the app component. Hello host, hello, just to see what happens. We update it, and then from the cart, apps cart source here, we can say hello cart, hello, just to see that it actually updates. And as I mentioned, usually it takes some time for it to reload, and what I figured is that when you update this module, it will do this for us. Alright, so hello host, hello, and hello. So we have the same component. Now if I would go to the button and style it a bit, we'll say button, we can say background black, color white. We can say padding 10px, border 0, border radius 4ps, and as you can see, it is live updating on both applications. And as you might understand, this is very trivial when you are working with a project and a component library and you want to debug things fast. For instance, if you have an issue, maybe somebody's reporting a bug on a component and you want to go into that component and validate it, you can just serve the application, go to that place and validate it in this manner. So it's terms of that, it's quite easy. So now that we have that out of the box, we want to be able to create a shared thing where we can share the data between the different applications. So as I mentioned, the user part. So to do that, we're going to generate a library. Let's see here, generate, search for library, and we are essentially going to, let's see here, we can scroll down a bit, we can generate library. We're going to select the nx/angular library, click on that one. We have some schematics. Let's call this shared data. All right, so the previous project that we had, also give it a name in this way. We can place it in libs shared data. So we have shared UI and now we have shared data, right? So in the same way, we're not going to let it be buildable. We're just going to generate in this way. It's now going to receive a couple of things. Closing the apps will have libs, so we should have shared, and the shared should now have data and UI. So to continue, we need to create a service, for instance, within the data. So within the lib folder, we'll go ahead and generate a library. Not a library, obviously. We're going to generate a component, a service, because that's what we're going to share. Hopefully we can see the project here. Data is not here, and what we can do is either you just do what we did before, nx clear, nx reset, and after resetting that, all right, so there's a couple of things. We could not stop the daemon because something's running probably, so we'll go ahead and do nx repair to see whether it would show up here. What you could do also is to just update the projects here, and they should appear here if everything works as is expected. And as you can see, we do not see the data, and I would say this is maybe a bug, or maybe I've set something up wrongfully. I'm not entirely sure about this really, but so let's make the screen a bit bigger. We want to stop the project. We go with nx repair. It will probably repair a couple of configuration files. Nx reset. So the daemon stopped. Now we can repair it. Let's see here. The UI, shared UI data should appear. It does not do that. Maybe sometimes you have to go here and regenerate something. So you'll regenerate the component. I'm sorry for this inconvenience, guys. Sometimes it's just working like this. I have no idea why it does not really. Sometimes restarting the project can also help. So we're going to restart the whole Visual Studio Code. So be right back shortly. Alright, now I'm back, and as we can see here, shared data is now present, so we know for a fact that the library is now has been created. So now we can go ahead and generate the service that we wanted to generate for the library. So we're going to say a service, and the service is going to be placed within shared data. Now it actually has some IntelliSense, and let's call it what we want to call this service. Maybe call it user service, just for convenience sake. So let's see here, it's generating the service. Now that the service has been generated, we should be able to see it in the library. Also, in what you should have as a rule of thumb, just always go ahead and export it from the barrel file. Alright, so now that we have the user service, we can add some logic to it. We're going to make it super easy, right? Let's see if we have the signals here. Yes, we do, my friend. Let's go ahead and say is logged in, and we can just make this signal private. I would say is logged in. The reason to why I have signals and not behavior subjects is because I want to make this a habit of me working. And then we can make a getter saying is logged in, and here we can just return this signal state of that, so that we cannot change it from outside without actually going through the service first. This is a quite nice pattern. Alright, so now that we have the is logged in variable, we also want to add two functions. We're not going to have some login screen for this. Here you could add the login screen, you could add the login function. Here we're going to keep it simple for us, right? So we're going to and also with signals, you need to call .set in order to set the variables, and or rather the signals. Now we have a semi file that we can use in order for us to actually share the is logged in state. Probably here you want to have the token stored, and you want to have a couple of different things that you can essentially fetch from your applications. Maybe it would be in the interceptors and so on, but let's keep this simple for now. You can decide what to put within the services yourselves. Alright, so let's continue, guys. So if we now serve the applications again, they died because we had to close them down. And as you might remember, we have the npm run dev that we created for simplicity's sake, so that we don't have to run everything at all times, and it runs with watch mode. So what we should be able to do now is just get the name of the module. We also need to let's see here, we should be able to import this service straight ahead. So what we really want to do is we want to go to our app component TS file in the host application. We want to add some logic there. The first thing we want to do is we want to inject the service that we just generated. We want to create a getter, which essentially fetches the login state. We want to also have two functions, one which will simulate the login, essentially calling that function, and one to simulate the logout, which would call that function. So after saving that, we can go to the HTML here. We can add a couple of things. So is logged in, and then we'll have the variable that we have is logged in, and then we want to have two buttons. One would simulate login and one that would simulate logout. All right, so to see what would happen. Okay, so we have on click, we're going to simulate login on that button, and on this one we're going to simulate logout. Saving this, we should be able to log in. Clicking on the login button should make us log in, and clicking on the other one should make us log out. So is login is false. When I click on login, it will call the simulate function, simulate login, and that will essentially call the service, which would then return a couple of things. So now we can see that we're essentially just calling the service utilizing that service logic. So now the more interesting part would be, how would this behave if we would go to the cart, for instance, the cart NX console page here, so we'd have, let's inject the private read-only user service equals to inject user service. So we'll inject the user service here, and then what we want to do is essentially just fetch the login state. This is probably something, as I mentioned, you could place whatever you want to be placed here. We're doing this just for simplicity's sake, just having to demonstrate how it can be used. And as you can see, it's false, false. When I press the login, it's not really being shared. So there's a couple of things more that needs to be done. The last thing we need to do is essentially just restart the project. As simple as that, right? Because NX will automatically find out through the NX graph which dependencies are being retrieved from where, and automatically add this to the dependencies of the shared libraries that we have for model federation. So this is where the magic really happens. It's as easy as just creating a library. We had to rebuild it because, as mentioned, the cart is a separate application which we run with build flag and so on, and in order for it to really re-evaluate things, restarting might be the solution. So if I click on login, the card should now have received true. When I press on the logout, the card should now be false. And in this way, we can share services, we can share functionality between different applications in a quite simple way. So this, my friends, is how we can share libraries in terms of UI components and in terms of shared data in this way. So for instance, in this case, we're sharing the user service data. Here is where you would have a microfrontend to handle the login, which would store the logged in token in a separate service, maybe in the user service, or if it would be an authorization service. And then the different applications would just inject that particular service to essentially fetch the token and add it to the interceptors. In that way, you can persist the login token between different micro frontend remotes and host applications. All right, so now that this is out of the way, we're going to look into our last part of the video. We're going to look into the build. How does it work with actually building the project and serving the projects post-build? How do we actually think of working with the micro frontends? And let's go ahead and look at that. So the first thing we want to do is essentially just make sure that we close the running project. We can go to the NX console. Here we should have a build, right? So let's build the host, and I think we can specify, let's see here, maybe not. So we'll build the host application first. There should be a dist folder here that would appear, and as you can see, the cart and product is already here because we were running them, or they're being executed with a build flag. So that's where the data, that's why we had to reload the application. You probably can have other ways of doing it, but I didn't have anything on top of my mind. So the easiest way was just to reload it. All right, so now we're generating a build for the host application. Let's see here. Might be the case that NX has improved and also builds the other applications as well. Also keep in mind that when you build one application, you do not want to rebuild all of the applications every time you deploy, because then does not really make sense to have micro frontend pattern if you don't really utilize that feature, right? Then you can have a monolith, or you can just have different libraries and so on to divide the code with lazy loading and so on. The reason to why you should want to have micro frontend is so that you have independent teams that can deploy a feature. For instance, you have a team working on the cart section, you have another team working on the product section. They should be able to deploy new features without breaking the complete logic for all of the different applications. So they should be able to deliver a new feature, just updating this product part, just remaining the cart that we had from previously. All right, so now we have the host, we have the product, and we have the cart. So now we have the three different applications here. So the big question is, how do we work with this post-deployment? I'm going to zoom in a bit so that we can see the structure a bit more. The question that I usually get is, how can we do this post deployment and so on? So it's quite simple, or really it might not be quite simple, but the concept is quite simple. If you open each one of the apps, you will see that they are identical. They all generate the similar design. The only thing that differs from the host and the cart is essentially that the remote application have a remote entry which we are interested in. We want to have the remote entry which we essentially import into our host application, because this is the logic that we set up. Okay, so now that we have it in this way, we should now be able to open this up. I'm going to utilize the live server to do this. So there's an extension, another extension in which you can use, so it will serve it in a way that makes it easier for us to actually look into. And this is not going to work. I can tell you that for a fact. And the reason to why I say it will not work is essentially because if we make the screen a bit bigger, so that it makes more sense to us to look at it, we can open the error console and you can see the output here. What is the issue? What is really happening? It doesn't really find the different things that we have. So the polyfills and everything. And the reason to this is because we need to specify the base URL or the base href. So this would be /apps/host, right? Because we need to come in here, but we're not going to come to host. We're really going to fetch from this, sorry. So this app host, this is the root of this application, okay? The reason to why this is the root of the application, I will make the screen a bit larger so that we can see it. We need to have the correct folder structure to where it's being placed within the logic. So we're placing it within this apps host. This is the way it will actually understand what to load and what not. But we still have another issue. So if we now add back to the Chrome, so we'll minimize this screen and we click on the remote entry, because it does not really it's not being able to load the remote entry. And as we can see here, it tries to load from a certain port. We're not running anything. Keep in mind that everything is static. So we have static files coming from the builds. So this, instead of having the local host, it should point towards the cart folder, right? Or it should be pointing toward the product folder. It depends on really what application we try to load. So what you should do is, now we'll go back to the VS Code. Sorry for jumping a lot, because there's a lot of things that we need to examine. So if you now go to the apps, we go to the host, and we check on the Webpack prod config. Here is where there's even comments from the NX team and Model Federation team that there is a couple of remotes we need to specify. I want to give heads up, and I want to say they have done a really, really great work. It's super easy to set it up. It's obviously takes some time. There's a learning curve, but once you get into it, it will become so much easier. So once again, thank you for bringing so much to the community, guys. I think everyone should be quite happy with this. And this is what the schematics gave us. I mentioned that we're not going to run on anything on port. So if you just say, it's not called app 1, it's called cart, and the second one was product, right? So now we need to figure out a couple of things. We are in the dist folder and we stand on the host. So how do I get back to the product, right? So we need to go out one folder, and from that folder we also need to jump into the product folder. So we'll go back one folder and then we'll jump into the product folder. And it's the same concept that we can have for the cart, right? We jump out one folder and we jump into the cart folder. This is something that will vary from team to team. It all depends on how your CI/CD is set up, how you deploy the applications, where they're being placed. These are things that needs to be aligned before starting to work with this stuff. All right, so now that we have this, we obviously need to rebuild the host, because rebuilding it will generate a bundle that contains this setup. So we can try this out. We'll do this by just being lazy as I am. We'll go to NX console and we'll generate a new, we will create a new build of the host application. So doing this, also keep in mind you can specify the base href. So let me just stop this and we will create a build. You can, okay, I thought it would give me, you need to press here on the You can click on host, and here we should have the base href, and here also it needs to be dist apps host, right? This is essentially where it's being placed right now and where we run the live server so that we can simulate this behavior. All right, so doing this, now we should be able to receive an output and something that loads with the folders in this way. And we need to make sure that this actually works. In some cases, you would have to have 3 different servers and so on, but let's look at this. All right, so if we go to the dist and we go to the host and we go to the index HTML file, we should have the generated base href already aligned here, which is correct. And I can also tell you for a fact that we do not have the base href for the cart and also for the product, so let's go ahead and just add it here. We should probably have something set up, and if you have CI/CD, you probably will have to set up the base href if they're not all being placed within the root, which I do not think they will be, because that would probably break a lot of logic. So product will have the cart. Now they all know the context, so if I would now minimize the screen to get back to the Chrome, and we would just reload the page here, what would happen? We still have some issues, right? So what are the issues? It says that it tries to find the cart on this port, and it seems like it cannot find it from the dist apps cart, so there's something wrong. So just examining the folder structure, we can see on the cart we should have a remote entry which should not be JS. It seems like it generates an MJS. So now we can go back to the Webpack prod once again, just adjusting that. Sorry for running into all of these problems with you guys. I just want to make sure that you guys know what to do when you run into this on your own, because I've probably run into this so many times myself that, yeah, I've done it so many times already, so I would know what to do when something occurs. So this apps host. All right, we'll execute this. It's once again going to generate a new thing, and it's going to have the MJS files that you can point towards. Let's see what happens, if this works for us or not. Okay, reload the page once again, and as you can see here, keep in mind we're not serving anything. This is all static files. So this is how it would look like when we deliver something to production. And as you can see here, we have that part, we have the cart. So if we're on the cart page, you can see that it still reflects. The reason to why I have the live server, sorry, I can see that I haven't really changed back the screen. So we're on localhost 127.0.0.1, port 5500, and then we have this apps host, right? So this is the base href, where it actually serves the indexed HTML file of the host application. Keep in mind, I run the live server to simulate how it would be when we place this code, this chunk of the dist folder within, for instance, a server. This is how the behavior would be, right? So it's a good way of actually simulating things locally on your computer before you deploy something to a server and then having to try to debug on that particular server. So if I go to the home, we're on the home. If I click on cart, you'll see all of the cart logic here, and you should see that the service still works. So it actually should be able to share the data between the cart and the host application. Also keep in mind, it should also have the same state from the product as well. We didn't add it because I thought it was a bit overkill to do it. So in this way, we're generating static files, which is essentially our dist folder. So you should be able to move your dist folder into a particular server and navigate to your server URL, adding dist apps host. If you want to have a different URL, keep in mind, if you want to have a different URL, because this does not look good for users, right? You can use rewrites, you could use proxies to change the URL and so on to make it more efficient and nice. We're not going to look into that. In this video, we're not going to look on deployment. We're actually just examining the build, looking how we can share the data and so on. And as you can see here, it's super trivial on how it works. So the last thing I want to say is that when we now rebuild the cart page, we do not want to, we want to be able to deliver the cart page without having to rebuild all of the other applications. So now let's take the product page per se, because the product page is it has a lot of content, right? So we're going to make this bigger. We're going to the NX welcome of the product page. We're going to remove the data, all of it. And we're going to say this was changed post deploy or post build. And with post deploy, I mean when we have deployed the host application or the cart application, this is a change that comes afterwards. So now if I build let's see, the product, let's specify the base href, it should be /this/app/product and trailing slash as well. When I build this one, it should not rebuild any other of the applications. So in theory, you should be able to move the product folder into your server, having the updates coming in a similar way that it did before, without having to rebuild all of the complete projects that you have. And that, my friends, is exactly how you want it to be. Let's see here, we go to the host, seems like something was not broken. And as you can see, all of the different applications that we had, so the cart, it's a standalone application which is used as a remote, and then the home. The only thing we changed was the product, and we delivered it by building a new instance of it. And with this, I mean, when you go to production, you should be able to individually deploy the cart page, the product page, maybe not the host, but the cart and the product page, you should have to only build them, right? And here is where NX comes with a lot of helps, schematics, and different things. So they have something called NX affected. I'm not going to jump into that in this video. If you want to know more about CI/CD and how to work with NX affected, please drop a comment and I will make sure to make a video about that. Anyhow, the NX affected works in such a way that it will understand what differences you have made, which checksums of which projects and libraries has been changed. So it will automatically understand, okay, you have changed our user service, which essentially is shared for the host applications. It's also shared for the cart. So it would automatically understand when I change the user service, it should rebuild the host and it should rebuild the cart. And this means that we could easily build a CI/CD pipeline that would just move these static folders that we generate. So as mentioned, it's all static. It's super easy when it's static because there's nothing that needs to be served. It's just files that you move in this way. Static files. So you would be able to move the product folder to your server without having to update the cart and host. And in similar matter, the other way around. You should be able to deploy the cart or the host individually. But keep in mind that the CI/CD for this might be a bit more complex than what it initially looks like, because there's only a couple of things you need to keep in mind as well. Alright guys, in this video I want to thank a couple of people who actually gave me the feedback of creating a video where we go through how to share things, and in particular we're referring to sharing data and not components. So we in this video looked into sharing the user service, and keep in mind you could essentially add whatever you want to add here. I added signal with a true and false flag just to simulate the behavior. We also looked into the post deployment, how that would work, how you should think about it, how it should be set up. And in the main theory, what you need to understand is that the configuration usually comes from the host file. Usually configure everything from the host file, and everything that comes post production is something we handle in the remotes. Alright guys, thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. All of the best. Thanks.